Hello, I'm Robert. Welcome to my channel where I do fact checking, hopefully help you if you're scared of many things. And this is for about the uh, third wave in the United Kingdom and about how we're managing to control it with vaccines and test, trace, isolate, and why we're not going to have a fourth wave. It doesn't look likely. And the third wave is actually, it's looking much better, the situation, than it seemed just a week ago. First of all, we have the example of Bolton, and this shows that they are successfully managing to control it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Bolton and about how the rest of the United Kingdom is doing. Then I'm going to talk about the how this is promising for the rest of the world, and we'll talk a little bit about the percentage we need to vaccinate to stop it with vaccines alone, which we can hopefully do sometime in 2022. So Bolton originally was one of the two very worst areas in England for the Delta variant. It was expanding very, very fast. As you can see, they're controlling it. Patients admitted to hospital are going down, ventilation going down, cases of course going down. And they have about 50% vaccinated. That's nowhere near enough to stop it with just vaccination alone, although it makes it much easier to control it. So how is it controlling it? I'm going to talk about that. But first I'm going to talk about what's happening in the rest of the country and why it's looking so much more promising. So first of all, this is what it was like originally, just a week ago. It was doubling doubling time was less than 2 weeks in Tayside, while they were also rolling back on restrictions. So it was somewhat less restrictive in Tayside. That looked like, rolling back when you've got it already doubling every 2 weeks and making it easier for people to mix. How is that going to work? It did look quite scary at the time, in the sense of you can still protect yourself if you just do it all, but worrying about the rest of the about what's going to happen in the NHS and so on. But it's really looking quite then this also, you see, this was the projection. Sage, 5th of May, they published this, and I'm sorry my diagram's a little bit messy and there's a lot to put on it, but this was before they identified the Delta variant, and they did a hypothetical variant that's 40% more transmissible, and these are the hospitalizations. You can see it's nearly the peak of wave 1 in number of hospitalizations, and it's 40 to 80% more transmissible, the Delta variant. It's also got more than double the number of hospitalizations per case. For the number of cases, if you had to say, you've got more hospitalizations for the same number of cases. And then as well as that, it's got significant vaccine escape. It had red alerts against it in 3 different categories according to Sage. And that's why many people were saying that Boris Johnson should never have moved to step 3 so quickly. It fulfilled all the conditions to wait a few weeks to see what happens first. And cases were rising, they should have been falling at the end of step 2, they were just starting to rise. So it's really a bit of a gamble, but it did work out, or a bit of taking a risk of some sort. But it does seem to be working out very luckily. At least not as bad as it seemed it would be. Still lots of cases of long COVID probably. But so if we look at that, it really was looking really quite bad. But then this is what happened in Scotland, and I'm just looking over to the other window where I've got a copy of it with larger text. And so you can see that it was doubling every 2 weeks is now much less than a doubling every 2 weeks. It was doubling, that means it's more than 5-fold, nearly 6-fold in 2 weeks. In Tayside, it's now less than a doubling every week in Tayside. So you can see that the rate of the doubling period is getting longer rather than shorter. There's something going on. If you look at all the worst cases, then they are actually getting more under control. All the ones with most cases per day. So this does look as if we are significantly altering the trajectory of this with whatever we're doing. So that's really quite promising. So now let's go back to my one. This is the vaccination across the UK. You'll see that it's nowhere near enough to be controlling it just with vaccines. And that's just how it works. So this is how Bolton is controlling it. So Bolton has, China in February 2020 was getting the PCR test turnaround time of 4 hours. You can't really speed up much more than that. That's how long it takes to do a PCR test. Length of time for the reactions and everything. But so China was doing that in the hospitals in 2020 in February, but only for symptomatic people. Bolton is doing enhanced PCR testing, results returned the same day for everyone in the hotspots. So they look at targeted hotspots where it's spreading most of all. And they test everyone, anyone who is willing to be tested. It's voluntary. And they're going around door to door with the tests, but getting the swabs, explaining why they're doing it. And this makes an absolutely huge difference. Because they are getting the symptomatic cases, but they're also getting the asymptomatic cases and pre-symptomatic. People have no idea that they've got no symptoms yet. Uganda was one of the first, was the first place to do it on a reasonably large scale. That was in April 2020, and they achieved a 90% reduction in transmission by using this method, and they ended the outbreak very quickly, just a few dozen cases, and they were soon gone. So this is very, very effective. And they're also supporting isolation. Now, the United Kingdom has very little by way of financial support, only if you've got very low income. But of course, if you've got a high income and you've got bills that you're paying out and so on, it's not so easy to isolate if you're going to have to be off work. And so you do need help. And as well as that, if you're in a multi-generational family, small, you're in the service industry or something, and you're in a multi-generation family, a very crowded home, and then it may be very difficult to isolate from the rest of your household. And the best way to protect your household is to isolate from them. And that's much easier said than done. It's easier done if you're in a wealthy an area with large houses. Like everybody has their own room. Some people have ensuite bathrooms or whatever. You maybe have a guest room in the garden or something. Then it'd be much easier to isolate from the rest of your household. So so you need support to isolate from your household. And New Zealand provides that. If you're a member of New Zealand, you don't have to pay anything. You get free isolation in a New Zealand hotel. So long as you're living in New Zealand, you're not returning from abroad. You get everything put on for you. You got broadband and everything for free. And that's what they should be doing in the United Kingdom. And so the World Health Organization have been saying that since February 2020, the United Kingdom is really very, very slow to the scene, but at last it's getting there. Another thing, that this is what Dr. Mike Ryan of the World Health Organization, he calls boot leather epidemiology. And he used to do it in Ebola in a shooting war with 14 different factions, I think, firing at each other, and having to wear bulletproof clothes to protect himself. And he was saying, if we could do it in the Congo in a shooting war, why can't you do it? Actually going around door to door. And so at last, and he was saying that I think in February, very early in 2020. And at last, we have it in the United Kingdom. We are very late, but we've got there in the end. So that's one of the keys, teams going around, engaging with the community, delivering leaflets. I haven't had a single leaflet through my door. I'm in Scotland about isolation. It did anything to do with COVID except vaccination. Saying that I should tell me about vaccination. I think that was the first and only leaflet I've had. So, advising them to do it all. Never had anybody come round, of course. And encourage them to do the rapid tests. And these rapid tests, that's a very good thing we've got now. The lateral flow tests. And I'm just going to show you. I don't think you actually see it, but this is my, anyone in the United Kingdom. You won't be able to see the result, but this is my packet of lateral flow tests. And this is my test. You won't be able to read it because the camera here isn't very good. I don't think you'll be able to see it. But it's I got a negative. Not too surprising because I'm very, very careful. But anyone in Scotland, anyone in the United Kingdom, then we are recommended to do 2 lateral flow tests a week. And this is very much like the Pro-Eucarnio thing. It's not so good as a PCR test. It misses some. It sometimes misses a positive. It's not quite so sensitive. But if this will help to catch some of the people who don't even know they've got COVID, and then they isolate, and if their contacts isolate as well, then this can help us to stop the transmission very, very fast. And that's why they keep saying on television to go and get your lateral flow test and do it. And so all these things are going on, and they're gradually helping. So these are things that you can do in any country. Now, PCR testing is very expensive, but many countries, I think just about every country can now do it, and they can focus the PCR tests, especially once you get down to fewer and fewer cases, you've got your hotspots, then you would be able to do this. Do surge testing with PCR tests. If you've got just a few thousand people out of a country of 10 or 100 million or whatever, then you'll be able to do that. So as the cases go down, you can do that more and more. So these are all things that people can do in any country. So India would be able to do that if it focuses it on areas that have got very bad hotspots. And similar with the vaccine drives. So this is a new thing that the IMF has got this new $50 billion fund for vaccines. It's sort of on top of COVAX, and they are going to focus on surge vaccination as a more important. It's already a component in COVAX, but it's going to be much more in the IMF initiative, where when a country has a hotspot, they can surge vaccines into it. But it's important not to leave out the countries that have done so well, like Australia. They need to be vaccinated too, or else they'll never be able to open up, because they have the most vulnerable populations in the world, for obvious reasons. So, so this is how we're going to be controlling it. And then look at India. Look, this is mainly through the public health. The vaccines will only have a very small effect in India. They have, I think, have a 3-month interval like they have in the United Kingdom. They have only a third reduction with 1 dose of AstraZeneca, and after 2 doses, it's going to be this 5-fold reduction. There's no way that they've managed to do that through vaccination. This is through public health. And then vaccination will help them later on. and will be helping a little bit by now. So then, as these cases go down, then we're going to get down to 1 case a day, and then sporadic cases. Now, I've got this here somewhere. If I can manage to find it, just leave me a moment. Yes, here we are. So, if we have a look at their South Dakota, and they have 12 cases a day, and Vermont 10 cases a day, and basically they are reducing by about 10-fold every month. And that's not the fastest you can do. New Zealand, when it controlled its outbreak and without any vaccines, and they reduced it rather faster than that. But 10-fold reduction in a month is not too bad. It's not too shabby. And if from 10 cases a day, then they can get down to 1 case a day in 1 month, and 1 case every 10 days, once by, say, the middle of August, if they keep this up. And as cases go down, so long as you keep your contact tracers employed, don't just say, oh, well, we've only got 1 case a day, you can all go, we don't need you anymore. So instead, do more contact tracing, do good epidemiology, go around these places, do what Bolton did. And if South Dakota and Vermont can do what Bolton did, once they get down to a few cases per day, they'll just get rid of it, probably faster than August. Then from then on, the only cases they will have are cases coming from other states. So this is if you look at the World Health Organization map, they've got a roadmap of how to get over this. They say they have 4 levels of community spread. I can't actually find the page which gives those 4 levels, but they've talked about these 4 levels. And then you have the 4 levels of community spread, then you have clusters, then you have sporadic cases, and finally you have no cases. And when you get to no cases, sporadic cases in the community, once you've got to no cases, then you've only got imported cases. And that's the situation in Australia, New Zealand, most of the time. New Zealand, Taiwan, Vietnam and China. About 1/5 of the world population is down to no cases, but for most of the time. And there are a few islands in the Pacific, and the Isle of Man, and somewhere else, Greenland. They have never had any cases. So there are some parts of the world that have managed to keep out cases ever since the start of the pandemic. Through quarantine, just being very careful. So then I was just going to talk a little bit. So that's the roadmap, and that's what we can achieve. And then once all the countries are down, and we've got it already eradicated like that from the 1/5 of the world. Now we've got the vaccines on top. Once all countries are down to sporadic cases and to no cases, then there are no countries left to import it from. All you've got left then are the animal reservoirs. As long as we're very careful at detecting any breakthroughs from what was the original animal reservoir or on wild minks if it's got into them, but that is really quite rare that that's going to happen. This is why it matters to find the origins to stop it coming over again. But that is going to be quite rare. So this is the roadmap to actually, well, basically eradicate it, except from the original animal reservoirs, which we're not going to be able to get eradicated from. Very unlikely we can. We've never eradicated yellow fever from the monkeys that bring it to humans. So it might well be like that, but it's probably doesn't get to humans very easily. Like more likely to be like MERS or Ebola, or even SARS, where once they realise it comes from civets, then it just doesn't come to humans anymore. So now, what can we do in the meantime? Then, first of all, people talk about, oh, we're getting rid of it with natural immunity. That's impossible. You can never get rid of a virus with natural immunity alone. The thing is that natural immunity slows down the virus more and more the higher it gets, but it never stops it exactly, never stops it completely. You have to have a little bit of a trickle of cases getting it to top up the natural immunity, to stop, and so you've got to have the virus trickling through your community constantly all the time to keep the natural immunity close to the herd immunity level. You only achieve the herd immunity level and go over it by artificial means, using vaccines. But if you already have some natural herd immunity and add a vaccine on top of it, then that will help. So you've got it turns out if you look at all the natural immunity in London, it adds maybe 8% to the antibodies from a single dose. But this is probably not perfect protection. We know that a single dose vaccine only reduces your risk by a third. The double dose reduces it by a fifth. Natural immunity is unlikely to reduce it by more than the double dose, and maybe more like the single dose. I don't think they know what the effectiveness is against the Delta variant of natural immunity against the Alpha variant. So now I'm going to talk, this is about the percentage you need to stop the vaccine. So we know that we can stop it with vaccination plus do it all. And Bolton has shown that at about 50%, that's the amount vaccinated in Bolton, then the extra bits can stop it very quickly. But what can we do to stopping it with just the vaccine alone? That's far more of a challenge. And this is because it's getting more contagious. Visual virus, we could stop that with 60% vaccinated if it was 100% effective vaccine. And obviously more than that if it's less than 100% effective. And this would be 66%. Then this is up to 80%. This is 80 to 87.5%. The higher the delta, the higher the R naught, the 5 to 8. So if one person infects 8 people, then you need to vaccinate a much higher number, up to 87.5%. For this is up to 80% if one person infects 5. If one person infects 3, it's 66%. And this is a very simple calculation. It's 100 minus 100 over the number. So 100 minus 100 over 8 gives you 87.5%. The rest of those you can probably do in your head, but I memorised that one. And actually you can do that in your head, it's quite easy to do in your head too, 12.5. So, but then you've got to take account of the vaccine efficacy. And if you look, for instance, at this, if it was at 87.5% transmission has to be stopped, and with an 80% effective vaccine, and that's what we achieve after 4 weeks after the second dose of AstraZeneca, then you're never going to be able to stop it with vaccination alone, even if everyone is vaccinated. And with the Pfizer vaccine, if it is an R naught of 8, then you're going to need more. You're going to need more than 87.5% effective, and it's only 88% with the Pfizer. Now, if it was R naught of 6, then it does get a little bit easier to do. R naught of 5, still, that's 80%. It would still not be possible with an 80% effective vaccine to do it with vaccine alone. But we do have better vaccines coming along, so that means that we're going to be doing test, trace, isolate at least through to the end of this year, probably into 2022. And we'll probably be doing at least a bit of do it all, and we'll have occasional hotspots, and we'll have to go in and do a Bolton type surge testing and everything in those hotspots. It doesn't mean we have to go into lockdown. We never needed a lockdown. If we'd done all of this very effectively, we wouldn't have gone into lockdown. We would never have gone into lockdown if we'd done really effective test, trace, isolate, and really educated people properly with do it all, and had bootlegger epidemiology. If in spring 2020 we'd had teams of epidemiologists and volunteers going round to everyone's house explaining everything, bootlegger epidemiology. You're not not professionals epidemiologists, but just people who've had a 1-week course in epidemiology, enough to go around and explain things on the doorstep. And if we'd really gone into that in spring 2020, explained it to everyone, if we'd built up a very fast testing capacity and contact tracing, if we'd done all that the World Health Organization suggested we do, we'd have ended this long ago. But sadly we didn't. But we can do it now. So we have a few percent of natural immunity on top of it. So even then, that's not going to, the natural immunity is not going to achieve your 80% immunity. It's very unlikely. So we just can't stop it. Not at transmission. If the R naught is 8, is 5 to 8, then we can't stop it with vaccines alone at the level we are now. So we've got to do the epidemiology. We've got to do some measure of the public health measures for now. So these are the things we need to do. Test, trace, isolate, absolutely, we've got to do that. For the rest of this year, we've got to do that. But next year I'll explain why we don't need to do it probably next year. We could probably eradicate it with just a vaccine. We've got to keep... now, this, I think the US CDC, their advice saying that you don't need to wear a mask if you're doubly vaccinated, it made sense with the Alpha variant with Pfizer, which is very effective against the Alpha variant if you're double vaccinated. I don't think it makes so much sense with the Delta variant, which is so much more transmissible and a slight dent in the effectiveness of Pfizer. So to explain why this works, they may well change their advice as the Delta variant starts to spread in the United States. So the reason is that the masks may reduce your risk of infection 4-fold. And they improve, this is data, or even 5-fold data from China. But that's just from the ancestral variant. And I don't think there's been recent research actually published. I can't find much. If you know something, do say. So if you've got a 5-fold reduction, or even a 10-fold reduction with the vaccine, and then if you wear a mask on top, say it's 5-fold reduction, the AstraZeneca in the United Kingdom, 80% reduction 4 weeks after the second dose. Now wear a mask as well. That's 4 to 5-fold reduction on top of that. That means you are at 20 to 25-fold reduction. And that means you're in the 95% or higher. It's like having a vaccine that's 95%. Essentially, by wearing a mask, you've turned an 80% effective vaccine into a 95% effective vaccine. So this is why I think it's good to continue to wear a mask, especially if you're in an area where the Delta variant is circulating. And then do physical distancing, add physical distancing on top of mask wearing, on top of double dose vaccinated, and even with the Delta variant, you've got just about zero risk. That's like a 99%, maybe 99.5%, even getting on for 100% effective vaccine if you do physical distancing as well. I mean, obviously, if you do physical distancing to the point that you stay at home and you order everything by post over the internet or something, then you would have zero risk. So that's the extreme version of it. But if you do, you visit the shop once a week and you do careful physical distancing and wear a mask, your risk will be almost zero. And then if you do a bit more than that, and you do some socialising, but you do it with an element of mask wearing and physical distancing, the more you do that, the more you're reducing your risk. Now, this is a bit about how it's actually, if it's spreading through super spreader events, then this may help explain why it is managing to slow down faster than those projections. Because we look at those projections there, it's going very, very fast. It's a very transmissible one. So why isn't it doing that? Well, it may partly be the Bolton thing, but it may partly be that the modelers have maybe not taken total account of the way it does super spreading. So if you have, there's always an awful lot of uncertainty in the modelling anyway. And so if it's spreading through, it seems to be spreading mainly through 20 to 24-year-olds. That wasn't predicted in the models. But it sort of makes sense that these are the ones who are most likely to take advantage of the reduction of restrictions, and they go rushing out to the pubs and they go and socialise with each other. And so, but then there'll only be some of that age group who do that sort of thing. Most of them, many of them will be very careful, and they just won't take advantage because they're scared of COVID. They realise it's still around. They want to be careful, want to protect themselves. So let's take an example of, and so many people I help over the internet. These scared people come to me. There's no way, and they're going to be rushing around seeing all their mates in pubs at this point, just because the government has opened up a bit. They're still going to be very careful. So there will be quite a few in that age group who are like that. So take a hypothetical example of a rambling club. And suppose that, and I just want to say that I'm no expert in any of this. All I know about all this is from blogging, from reading papers for the last year, from watching the World Health Organization. Never studied this, never had any training in this. So I'm just, I give sources, go through me to the sources. Don't use me as a source, please. I'm not making predictions. Please don't go around saying Robert Walker said such and such, so therefore that. Only use me as a source, as a way to get to other sources if you want to quote anything. So this is just a hypothetical example. So if we could drill down to all the way down to local population, this is just to give you an idea. Let's suppose we have a hypothetical group of ramblers in a rambling club, and every week they go off on a ramble up the hills. And this is like, you've also got these young people going in and in pubs and so on. But I'm taking a simpler example. And so most rambling clubs will be very careful. But this particular group, when they're out rambling, they don't do any physical distancing. When they get back, then they just mix around and they talk very, very close up. They don't do any physical distancing at all. And some of them have been maybe double vaccinated and so on. And so, but we're talking about maybe young ones here, and they've never even had a vaccine, and maybe a lot of them are vaccine hesitant, as some of them still are in the young age group. So we've got this group of very vulnerable people who meet up every week, and then most occasions they're not going to get infected, but then one day the Delta variant finds one of them, and then they immediately start infecting the others. And they have their weekly meet, and then they discover a few days later that just about everyone on that meet has got COVID. So then they become a super spreader. They spread it to their friends, to their relatives, when they mix in the pubs and so on. And so this is part of what causes the R naught, causes it to be doubling every 5 to 7 days when it passes through them. But having done that, then some of them didn't get it, and a lot of them have been infected, and some of them infected and didn't have any symptoms, and so they then become a bottleneck. From being a place that it surges through, they become a bottleneck. And then they also probably are going to be much more careful. Some of them will get vaccinated as soon as they get a chance. Maybe a lot of them will. They'll start doing physical distancing and mask wearing. And so you can see how without all of them getting infected, then maybe half of them get infected, then it's going to start slowing down a lot. And then you've also got that the natural herd immunity, because of precautions we're doing already, is about 50%. So the R of transmission is about 2, not 5 or 8, because of the precautions we're already doing. So if half of them get it, then it stops. More than half of them get it. If you can stop more than half the transmission, and you've very good RT of 2, then it's going to stop. So it's going to trickle away and filter out. So you can sort of see why in their projections that they have this curve that goes up, and it goes around and then it starts going down again, because you get all these bottlenecks forming, and you get the R naught, and you've got the vaccine continuing, you've got the natural infection, and it just gradually gets stopped. But this, if it's going through super spreader events, and in a particular age group, and only a subset of that age group, if that's the community it's spreading through, then once you've got a fair number of that either infected or vaccinated, and then vaccination increasing on top of the natural herd immunity, and remember, if you've got natural herd immunity and you add vaccine on top of the herd immunity, then the herd immunity plus vaccination can lead to it completely stopping. And so I'm talking here about the RT not opening up completely, because we haven't opened up completely yet, if we stay at step 3. So, and then even if it goes to step 4, it's going to go up to a lower peak and it's going to go down. That's the hope. But we'll have to see what happens and whether we open up. So the good news is that Boris Johnson is delaying opening up for at least another month. And we've got a chance to have much better models, a much better understanding. And the expert SAGE group will be able to model exactly what happens with the Delta variant itself. And assuming, hopefully we don't get another much worse variant, that's another possibility. That's one of the reasons why it's very important to keep numbers down, because if numbers are high, we can get more variants coming along, and one that be even more transmissible and even worse than the Delta. That can happen. But hopefully it's not going to be too much worse the next one, whatever it is, and we're going to be able to turn this around and stop it by the summer, end of the summer. And so now, but we need to stop. Yes, what I'm going to talk about now. This is about why we have to stop. I've got the sound turned down. Hopefully you...
COVID-19 has affected every country in the world. With vaccines now rolling out, protection against the virus is spreading. But with virus variants...
I hope you're not hearing anything. Just mute. Sorry, I'll just mute the sound. Okay, now I'll just go back. I hope you didn't hear anything. Let's go back. I can't tell if you're hearing anything. Oh yes, mute it there. Right. So this is about how the vaccines rolling out, they're protecting some hypothetical countries, and then the virus variants start coming in, then you vaccine against those again. Yes, if you can vaccine the poorer countries, then that means you get much less of these variants spreading, and so you can, by vaccinating the world, you reduce the risk for everyone. Yes, so that's the protection spreading. Then the variants start spreading from the ones that weren't vaccinated. But then through COVAX, you vaccinated everyone, and so then you don't get the variants spreading, and so you get global protection. So that's the point in the... Now, if we look at it worldwide, then we all get cases going down in all the world globally. And we're going down for 7 weeks, I think, now. And then if we look at the WHO regions, it's only increasing in Africa, which has very low total cases in the last, only 65,000 cases, or less than 10,000 cases a day in the whole of Africa. Oh, yeah, and it's decreasing in the in only 2%, and it's decreasing in all the other areas. So the world is looking good, but we do need to rush out the vaccines. And when we get to perhaps 50 or 60% vaccinated, as we saw with Bolton, then what Bolton did gets much easier, even with the Delta variant. And the IMF is aiming for 40% in 2021, but if you look at the vaccine capacity, it's absolutely huge. We've got enough vaccine capacity to give 2 doses for everyone in the world in 2021, and even accounting for, say, 3 doses in some of the wealthier countries, we can still get 2 doses probably for all the adults in 2021, and then beyond to the children and babies in early 2022. The wealthier countries will be vaccinating babies by the end of this year. Pfizer should be fully authorized for adults later by the autumn. I mean, that's just pretty much a formality, but they've got to work through it because they've already had 6 months data. But it's quite a long process to do the whole thing. And then for children, then they should have the Pfizer, it's already being, even down to babies, by the end of 2021 they should be vaccinating babies safely in the United States. And so by the end of 2021, then we should be vaccinating with much better vaccines than we have now. And then, but before I go on to that, look at this huge amount of vaccine capacity that we have for 2022. Absolutely huge. We've got 40 billion, and that's 10 billion a quarter. And that's enough to vaccinate the world. 10 billion a quarter. Oh, sorry, so that's enough for 7 doses a year for the entire world. 42 billion. Have I got that right? 7 doses a year. That's a year. Yes, that's right. 7 pilots with 7.8 billion. I think I've got my number wrong here. I'll just correct it. More than 5 doses every, I thought those were 6 months, but every year. So 5 doses a year. Yes, 5 times 7.8 billion. Yes, so we could do, I'll change that 6 months to every year because I thought those were 6 monthly figures. I just realised now they're yearly figures. They used to divide it up according to 6 months, and that's why I misread it. So 5 doses a year, I mean at that rate, that's nearly every 2 months. We can vaccinate the entire world again. And bearing in mind that we won't vaccinate everyone, then it's roughly every 2 months we'll be able to vaccinate everyone in 2022 with booster doses, to tackle variants and everything. And then these doses are going to, and then it's not taking account of new ideas that are coming along. For instance, there are new developments that make a vaccine in hen's eggs with the hexapro tweak, which means it's a much more effective vaccine that can be grown in hen's eggs, and they can grow more vaccine in a hen's egg than you can for flu. So it'll be easier to produce for flu and yet more effective than Pfizer. And this is what, well, we can hope. There's a chance of that. So we may have very easy vaccines to make later this year or early 2022 that'll be even more effective. So we need well north of 90% effective vaccine to stop the Delta variant, and then very high coverage of people. But then look at all these vaccines that we've got in development, and then I could look a little bit about, where did I put it? I've got a section about the vaccines that we're developing already. Where is it? Have I lost it? Oh dear, I've lost it. Oh, here we are, improvements in vaccines. So yes, the X-approach tweak, which will be much stronger antibodies. The 2B tweak was how Pfizer is more effective than AstraZeneca, why it's well over 90% compared to 80, why it's 88% even against the Delta. It's because of the 2B tweak, which makes the spikes more stable, and as a result, the spikes generate better antibodies. And then the X-approach tweak will make it even more stable. It'll mean you can store it in fridge temperatures, even if it's Pfizer or Moderna, and it'll also produce much more antibodies and much more efficient antibodies. So, because the spikes are all the right shape, it produces stronger antibodies. And so, there's also the idea of a universal vaccine, maybe even that can protect against MERS and SARS. And this idea is looking at epitopes, which are bits of the virus that trigger antibodies, and looking at ones that are common to all the viruses, even including SARS and MERS. And the idea is that anything that's common to all of those must be vital to the virus to survive. So if you can develop antibodies to kind of stick onto those things, then it's going to stop it. And then if the because if it is actually vital to the virus and can't be mutated around, then you won't get any vaccine escape. So this is hypothetical. They don't know if it's going to work, but they're trying it out. But what we definitely can do are vaccines that vaccinate against several viruses in the same dose. And apparently with pneumonia, they have vaccines that can vaccinate against 23 different viruses in one dose. So we can surely manage 3 to 4 variants in one dose. And it's quite common with flu to vaccinate against 4 variants in one dose. And we've got a much faster turnaround time of Moderna. think they can do a new vaccine in 3 months. It depends a little bit on the regulatory approach. But we do new vaccines for flu every 6 months, targeting maybe 4 variants at once. So it certainly seems feasible that every 3 months we could have a new vaccine that targets, say, 4 variants at once. And the other thing is, you see, that if you've got a vaccine that already targets against, say, the beta variant, the one first identified in South Africa, and also the ancestral variant, and this is a combination that Moderna is trying at the moment. They've got that in trials, clinical trials right now, testing people with various dosing levels of sometimes both the South African one, the beta one first identified in South Africa, sometimes the ancestral one, sometimes a mix of the two, and various doses of each. And hopefully the one that's a mix of the ancestral plus the South African one will be more effective against both the South African one and also against other variants, because it's triggering a wider range of antibodies. So once you've got 4 different variants in your vaccine, then you've got more antibodies being triggered that will then be more effective against other antibodies, against other variants, hopefully. So lots of things coming along. Well, and then the other thing we do is if we can vaccinate the entire world, suppress it throughout the world, get down to clusters and even sporadic cases throughout the world through vaccination plus health measures, then there'll be much fewer of the new variants. We just won't get the new variants emerging anymore. And yes, that's what I was explaining. I think I explained that before with the did I explain that? Yes, about how so we all have to that's how everyone gets safe. So I think I've explained everything now. Hopefully I have. And so with improvements in the vaccines, we can get to the point where we don't even need to do test, trace, isolate. But it makes sense to do it, really. I don't see why we shouldn't do it. And we certainly can reduce the wearing a mask. It still makes sense now, and physical distancing, especially with the Delta variant. But as we bring cases way down, as we get more and more people vaccinated, as we get better vaccines, then I just don't get the people who say that we're going to have to do this indefinitely. Wearing masks and washing your hands and everything is good for stopping flu. So in that sense, it's good to keep doing that indefinitely if you want to. It's always been recommended for flu. And it is good, especially if you're elderly, to avoid getting flu. So we may well get people who are a little bit braver about wearing masks. They're advised by the doctors to wear masks and they say, oh well, I will do that. And so I think we'll get more mask wearing. It may become more common, like it became in Asia as a result of SARS. So we may well get the mask wearing becomes more common in Western countries as well, for people who just out and about in the crowds and things. I mean, after all, why do other people in the crowds need to be able to see you smile? And that's for a reason like that, if it makes you safer from flu. And maybe people just get more used to reading smiles from people's eyes than from their lips. Anyway, we'll see what happens. But so as time goes on, then but I don't think I think the vaccines alone in 2022 we're going to have so many of them. We've got so many in development. And so if you look at the numbers in development, I've got the figure there. 51. It's over 100 in over 100 new vaccines that are going to be coming out. Even accounting for some of them abandoned, only been 4 abandoned so far for various reasons, mainly because there being other vaccines that are better, and so they start to better putting the resources into developing therapeutics and other things. So we can expect another 100 vaccines to complete their all the way through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 due to the incredible success rate of these vaccines. 100 different vaccines, numerous different technologies, some that you could just spray in your nostril instead of some you could just take as a tablet, some that are grown in hen's eggs, some that are grown in plants, in the tobacco plant, and so on, using different technologies, different approaches. So it's actually, some people have said that we've moved forward about 10 years in vaccine research in just 1 year. And there's a paper just come out in Nature saying that there's going to be a lasting legacy for vaccination for all diseases as a result of all this work into COVID vaccines. For instance, we would never have had mRNA vaccines by now. They would still be they would complete their phase 3 trials probably towards the end of this decade or something. And yet here we are, not because the trial was rushed, but because there was such a huge pandemic, so many cases, so you got the results very, very quickly. And the funding for very large phase 3 trials. So they did a trial in a few weeks that would normally take many years. And then all the overlapping of funding for the different phases and for the actual producing the vaccines. And then all the research funding and all the people doing research. So we moved forward hugely, very, very quickly. Anyway, so I think I'm finished. So, so there's just one other thing, that they should be testing this Theo Sanderson. He's written a paper, he's I think an author of the paper, I think, arguing for reducing the vaccine dosage just a bit. And for instance, you could quarter of the vaccine dose for Moderna, which means 4 times as many people vaccinated, for the same amount of the Moderna vaccine. And especially with Moderna, it turns out that a quarter of the dose, reducing the antibody levels only fractionally, and probably makes hardly any difference to the level of protection. So he argues that they should do some phase 3 trials of Moderna with a quarter of the dose. And if that works, then it'll mean 4 times as many people can be vaccinated with Moderna with the same amount of vaccine. And so that's another thing that's going to be coming along, is some of the vaccines they'll find out they need much less dose than they originally thought they needed. So lots and lots of hugely positive things happening. We've also got the therapeutics. I'll just touch on that and then I'll finish. So COVID is an immensely complex disease, and it's very difficult to treat because it affects so many organs in the human body. So you need to use very powerful drugs to treat it. And so it's much easier to vaccinate, and the vaccines have been hugely successful. Just about every vaccine has been passed. So it's in a particular situation of being a disease that is very easy to vaccinate against, but extremely difficult to treat. And that's why it's been so difficult to get therapeutics. And you get people just get very, very keen about, like, ivermectin or something, and they say, well, this is absolutely brilliant in small-scale trials. But especially if you're using it at an early stage, and some of the drugs will be very effective at even stopping you getting it, or at curing it very, very early on when it's just mild. But you've got to be absolutely sure that you're not going to get some people dying of that drug in significant numbers. And you can't tell that from small-scale trials. And so you get these people who are very enthusiastic about this drug. Then even a drug that is harmless, like ivermectin, is harmless for stopping certain parasites. But does it have some interaction with the way the body works when you are a severe case of COVID that could actually risk you dying of that interaction? Nothing to do with parasites. There are no parasites in your body involved. So that's why you've got to be so very, very careful and do proper trials. And I think 300, getting on for 400 drugs in trial at the moment. We've only got one, dexamethasone, that is really that makes a very significant difference to the deaths, and it has been approved. But by the end of this year, we can expect more drugs. It's impossible to tell how effective they're going to be until we get the results of the trials. But we can expect that some that are purpose built for COVID, purpose designed based on understanding how COVID works, and then there are others that have seemed very effective in small trials, and some of them hopefully will not have bad side effects, and if so, they might make a huge difference to the therapeutics towards the end of 2021. So that's the last good point, that we can expect that as well. So things look hugely positive, and as long as we keep some measure of test trace isolate, then we should be able to see, I can't see us having a fourth wave in the United Kingdom. And remember, the vaccine is far, far more effective than for flu. These people keep on saying we're going to have thousands of people dying every year because of flu. But that doesn't make sense, because flu only has a 40 to 60% effective vaccine, and test trace isolate doesn't work for flu. It's not very effective because flu, you get flu so quickly and you pass it on to other people so quickly. But it's very effective for COVID. So we are in a very different situation from flu, and I can't see us having a fourth wave in winter in the United Kingdom. And it's not particularly seasonal. Here we have a potential of a huge wave in the summer. It's not to do with whether it's cold or warm. And it's not to do with whether it's wet or dry. It's mainly to do with whether people are mixing a lot at close quarters, especially indoors with poor ventilation. So long as we keep good ventilation, then that will make a huge difference, and that annuls the difference between winter and summer. And if you can reduce the physical distancing a bit and so on, and a bit of mask wearing if necessary, but just the test trace isolate by itself is enough to make a huge difference. And I'm just very glad to see the United Kingdom at last is taking it seriously. And once we get localised down to a few hotspots in the country, it'll get far, far easier to control. So, anyway, so things are looking much, much better than they did a week ago for the wave in the summer. And then, as for long term, then I think the most vaccinated countries are going to be over towards the end of 2021 with the IMF support. Then the weaker economy is going to be 40% vaccinated by the end of 2021, and hopefully much more than that, because there's going to be a huge surplus of doses from the United States, United Kingdom, etc. And the donations they've given so far are just a start, and because we've got this huge capacity for 2021, which is growing as well as time goes on. So, long term, I'm very optimistic. I think that, you've tried following up yourself and check the things I've said. It does look pretty optimistic, I think. If I've made any mistakes in this video, then please let me know and say in the comments, or contact me directly. And if just a bit of a shout out for Doomsday Debunked group on Facebook, where we have now we have a lot of people who have a lot of understanding, knowledge of many things, and a great team of debunkers on the group. So do join and get and they really will help if you're scared of things like this. Lot of people, and do help if you're good at debunking. If you've been you don't need to be an expert. You just need to be like me, and just need to be someone who carefully checks your sources, and go and make sure that you put people in contact with the good sources, make that connection. And the World Health Organization is encouraging the sort of thing that I'm doing. People talking about what to do and doing but the important thing is that we are like ambassadors for, saying, go and look, there is where to look, not me, but out there to the World Health Organization, to the experts, and follow up the links that I've given here. And I strongly recommend you watch the social media Q/A for the World Health Organization. If you watch that every week on a Wednesday, then you will get a much better idea of what's happening with COVID than almost any other source, than any other source. And the US CDC is good as well, and Dr. Fauci, I would say, they're amongst the best sources on this in the world. And then, of course, your local, there are many other experts that give you very good advice. But do watch out for junk science. I think I'm going to do a separate post about junk science. That's quite a strange thing, where you see these papers that look as if they're very, very authentic. But basically, they are like the way that in Indonesia, people used to make planes that looked as if they could fly and everything, and artificial air strips and everything. They made it a kind of a religion in order to try and attract the airdrops of supplies, and planes to come in and bring them supplies. And a lot of the junk science that you see, it looks like the genuine fucker thing. But if you go and look at it with the eye of a scientist, and they're published in science journals, and they're by people who've actually had degrees, and so they've learned how to emulate the scientific method very, very well. But some people who have science degrees then sort of lose track of how science works, and they head off into this kind of area called junk science, where they publish things that look like scientific papers, but they aren't. They're not following the scientific method. They are no more a science paper than those replica planes on that made-up runway in Indonesia was a plane. It couldn't fly, and their paper can't prove anything. It's not science at all. And sadly, the junk scientists have come out of their rabbit holes, and they've gone publishing loads and loads of junk papers about COVID, So do watch out for that. It looks exactly like the real thing. Just like the wooden plane from a distance would look like it's a real plane, except especially if you're not very familiar with planes. So do watch out, look out for junk science. And anyway, so I'll stop this now and upload it, and hopefully that's helped some of you. And yes, if you join our Dubsy Debunk group, please check the rules at the head of the group. They're there for a reason, before you post or you comment. You can also just follow it anonymously, as it's a public group, so you don't need to join if you're scared of things. You just want to keep an eye on what's happening there.